We're gonna do another video, another piece of our story, piece 106. Are you ready to start? Yep, we've made it to Oklahoma in our last episode, right? It was September 1st, 2009, not even a year from your wreck. We brought you from New Orleans. Tina helped. We brought him from New Orleans all the way to Norman, Oklahoma, and that was quite a trip. I'll just say, leave it at that. We'll leave out the gory details of that. We were at Grace and Norman. They took really good care of Chris. I was thankful they took him in. I started working with him on eating and some different things. He slept a lot, and we would end up staying there until June of 2010. And after we had been there a few months, I was still living with people. I was basically homeless, but not in the sense that I was on the street. But I was very displaced, disoriented, and I couldn't find a norm. There wasn't a norm. So I had stayed with Chris until we got to Truro. I had literally been with him 24/7. And then when we got to Truro, uh, I could only go certain hours of the day and different parts of the day, right? So when we got to Norman, I couldn't stay with him, of course, in the nursing home here, and but that was okay. So I would get up early in the morning and get there about 7 or 8 so that I could take him a feeding breakfast, or take him down to start feeding breakfast and things. And so I get there about 7, and I would leave by 3:30 or 4. He was out, right? So I would leave. I actually started two things in the evenings. One thing I did is I got a job tutoring at Sylvan, so I had a little tiny bit of money coming in. Don't push your chair. Don't push your chair. So I had a little bit of money coming in, and then I also started Taekwondo, and I got to do some Taekwondo. And can you cough that out? This is okay. We just deal with this all the time. He'll cough it out in a second here. I just had him standing up doing some exercises, so he may cough it out here in a minute. Anyway, so we I started doing Taekwondo. I didn't know, actually, the place there in Norman, they actually gave me Taekwondo. I didn't even pay for it. I had to buy my own weapons. I had to buy my own suits and gear and things like that, but I didn't have to pay for the lessons. And that was such a blessing during that time. And I didn't realize how tense I was until I would go in, and I had to really think about, what the moves and when we did the form work, and when we did all the different steps and everything. And so when I would come off the mat, I would go, what was I thinking about? And so it was so good for me. Um, and so it was just pretty awesome that I had during that time. So I would get up really early and go with Chris. Had started running, so I ran, but I worked with him all day long, and then I would leave because I knew after about 4 he was out anyway, right? So I had the evenings. I was staying with some friends of Renella's because they didn't really have room in their house, or they have a baby. It was a very crazy time anyway, right, for all of us. And so after the first of the year, I started thinking, he needed a little bit more. And they didn't do anything wrong as far as Grace. They just weren't geared to make somebody progress. They were to take care and do as much as they could, and mostly dealt with older people. There was a couple of other younger people there in at Grace too while we were there. But anyway, we I started thinking we needed something else. So I started looking at different options, and I didn't even know if I could bring him home. I didn't know if I was able to take care of him. I didn't know if financially how I was going to do it or anything. Here, can you hold your head up a little bit so you can breathe a little better? Hold your head up a little bit so you can breathe a little bit better. Don't interrupt my story. I'm in the middle of our story. It's really uncomfortable. Anyway, so I was looking at different options, and finally Valor here in Oklahoma City said that they could take him. But the catch was, and then I could do the Medicaid, the Advantage program. It's not like Medicare Advantage. It's a Medicaid Advantage program, in that it would buy the equipment I would need, and supply and aid and supply. Some of the supplies, they've changed over the years, but back then it was quite a bit of supplies and different things that I would need to take care of him. And so I started looking at that. We looked at I looked at several different programs and talked to family to try to make the best choices possible. So finally it came down to Valor said they would take him 21 days. He'd be in 3 weeks, but I had to have some place like an apartment or someplace to discharge him to. Remember, I didn't even have a home. I felt so homeless, so out of place. It was just a real crazy time. You can't plan the future. Everything's so foggy. You can't plan because you don't even know what a day's going to look like. And I certainly couldn't picture where we are now, getting him in the standing frame, make it like just now I stood it and maybe do some exercises here. And in a minute, I'll go toss him in the bed. I'll be gentle. But I just couldn't really even plan. So I had to get an apartment, but I didn't have a job, so not a real job. I had a little bit coming in from Sylvan, but somewhere in there, Sylvan closed down. I can't remember when that was, or I think I may have had to quit when I brought him home. I'm not real sure how. A lot of that's really fuzzy. I'd have to go back and look at my journals to see the specifics. But anyway, I had to have an apartment. Well, didn't have a real good income, so other than Sylvan, which was fixing to go away, because once I brought him home, I couldn't go to Sylvan every night, 2 or 3 evenings a week. And so I didn't have a vehicle I could get him in. So it was going to change really drastically again. But I went to DHS and I got Section 8 and I got food stamps. But the problem was I could only get a 1-bedroom apartment because he was in a nursing home. I couldn't get a 2-bedroom apartment. So I got this one little podunk apartment. It was so little, 1-bedroom apartment. But I love that little apartment. If it was just me, I might move back there. Well, it was kind of in the ghetto, so I probably wouldn't. I was really comfortable in the ghetto, but I liked it. I liked it. And actually liked that it was the ghetto because they looked out for everybody. They knew who came to my house, how long they were there when they left, who wanted to know who it was. I was like, I'm being really watched, so this is perfect. I like this, right? And anyway, so I got a little 1-bedroom apartment, and then he went to Valor after I got that apartment. And so I was in that apartment 3 weeks before he came home. It might have been 2 weeks. I think it was 3. Valor at first told me not to come for a couple of days, that they wanted to establish a rapport with him. Well, then once they really reevaluated him, they realized he was nonverbal and that they weren't going to make him jump up and run in 3 weeks. But so they invited me. Then I had to come every day, all day. And basically they taught me so much about range of motion, the feeding part, the standing, mostly transfers and things like that. I learned a lot about the tone that he was having a problem with then, and just all kinds of things. So I learned a whole lot. I had a workout at Valor those 3 weeks, but when I was at Valor, while he was at Valor, I also got my first writing client. My first writing client, I would write 400 words for $1. And I was so excited to get it. And I got more than money I was just so excited. I could write 10 of them in a day and make $10 in a day. Wow! Which it was more in 2010 too. But I was really excited about that and just excited to finally find a good writing client. I also found a couple of sites I could write for, but that wasn't very lucrative. But I got this one, and her name was Jackie. And I don't know where she was in the world, but she taught me everything, all the basics about writing and writing for online purposes, and so I was so excited to have her. I worked for her for a long time. So I brought him home, actually had a job. I worked for her a lot, but I'll have to say when I brought him home, it was quite the transition because I had never cared for anybody who was total care before, ever. I hadn't even really ever cared for anybody before, right? Other than, the kids were little. Of course, I took care of them when they were little kids. But I was so scared when I brought him home because I was so afraid. Every time I had to transfer him, I would just get sick to my stomach because I'm like, oh my gosh, what if I drop him? Well, we dropped him twice. Not bad, and he wasn't hurt. It's actually really funny. One time I stood him up and he toned out, and I wasn't ready for it, but we fell into the recliner. All good, right? Except that I looked over and realized my phone was on the table, so I couldn't call anybody. I had to figure out how to get out of it because he landed on top of me. We figured it out. We lived, right? You probably don't remember that, do you? Probably don't. Anyway, and another time he kind of just went to his knees, and I let him go to his knees and laid him on the floor. Called 911, said, I need just a lift assist. And they came and put a sheet under him, put him in the bed. So both were funny now, but they were not funny then. I was so scared when I first brought him home. He also slept for almost all day. So when I first brought him home, my first goal was, I want you up in the chair for 1 hour a day. That was it, right? And gradually we worked 2 hours. Gradually we worked 2 times a day. And now we get up and down. I put him over in the recliner. I put him in the bed. We just do all kinds of crazy stuff now, don't we? Now I've just now got a vehicle, and I can get him in the vehicle by myself. So we're working on a brand new transition. That's a really cool thing, except for the payment. But anyway, so I brought him to that little apartment. It was July 1st, 2010. And we began to work, and he would go back and forth. He would come out and do some really cool things. He would count with his fingers. Before he got all contractured, and he would get sick, and he would just stop moving stuff, or something would get hurt or broke. This hand shriveled up really, really early on. Actually, by the time I got him home, it had already started that, and just because he didn't use it right. And so it was a very hard time. It was just me and him then. There was nobody there to ask questions of, and family did help some, really, especially early on, and let me get out a little bit. Would go get groceries. We didn't have delivery and all that back in 2010, right? 14 short years ago. And so we started making it. I started learning all about tube feeding. I had never tube fed except for the Jevity, and how to get supplies. You got to work with your DHS case manager, and how to change companies, and I didn't even have. The apartment was so little. I could stand in the kitchen cooking at the stove and lean back and see him in the bedroom. I could see the whole apartment. It was a little bitty 1-bedroom apartment, and I slept on a bed besides his. His hospital bed took up the whole bedroom, and I had a little bitty twin-size bed on the other wall there. That way I was right there, and we were there almost 6 months. Almost 6 months. I completed a lease. I guess it was only a 6-month lease, and by then I knew we had to have a 2-bedroom, and we were still on Section 8. We were still on food stamps. My goal was to work us off of the system, though, and I don't even know what year we got off the system. That was a long time ago now, but we worked ourselves off of the system. We still get like Medicare Advantage stuff to help with supplies and equipment when we need it. They purchase some equipment, and that's helpful. But I couldn't see this day back then for sure, right? I wouldn't have been able to see how much he can actually do now. He slept so much of the time, and literally just getting him up was enough work for him. Good job, bud. Good job, buddy. And so we got a little 2-bedroom apartment because we didn't have laundry facilities in our apartment. I was paying through the wazoo with quarters every week trying to keep up with laundry when you're caregiving. But that wasn't something I could have figured out when I first got that first apartment. So we moved after 6 months to a 2-bedroom, and it was like almost like heaven. We had 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and it was a nice little apartment. It was in a nice neighborhood and right by a park, so we could go walk outside. Yeah, you need to cough. Can you cough that out, please? Cough it out real good, okay? You need to cough all that out. I'm not gonna let you go to bed till you cough it out. Anyway, so that, and some of the trying things there was he would get sick. He would get so sick so fast, and we'd end up in the hospital. We have been, I don't know, there was one year we were in the hospital. I think he was in the hospital like 10 times, and I've got my system down. I actually loaded here because he's got these breathing problems. I've got my coffee pot and his food all packaged in case we need to go right now. But his numbers are good. He just sounds terrible, right? I know, you just sound yucky. I know. Cough it out, buddy. You're all right. Oh, gurgly. All gurgly. He'll get it all right. You'll be all right in a minute. Cough it out. Cough it out. Yeah, cough it out. You're okay. Anyway, so we lived in that second apartment for quite a while. We've been in North Side Oklahoma City, but I've had him home now since 2010. So that was 14 years in July. Transfers, no, I'm very careful with transfers, but they no longer scare me. Like I said, I just got a vehicle. I can put him in the vehicle. I've been using a handicap van for quite a while, and I can actually put him in the vehicle now. So we're working on that, but we're taking our time I still got both vehicles. So, cause I don't trust me or him yet. I'm still nervous about new things, right? But, during that time, I taught ESL online. I began to be able to do Bible studies online. I began to do a lot of writing. And I wrote 31 Days in Psalm 31. That was kind of my big book, my first big book, right? And so I began to do some writing, and And it was like things opened. I remember one of my first prayers when I first brought him home, because it felt like I moved to a cave. Because even though we'd been in nursing homes and rehab facilities and hospitals and all that, there had been people around. And now we're home 24/7, nothing, no one. It's just us, right? And it was a whole new world. It was very hard because I'm a very social person. I've always been a very active person, and all of a sudden I'm in this apartment and I can't leave. I can't leave him there because technically he can't call 911. So I can't. Sometimes I put him in the recliner and just to take out the trash and stuff. I have to be very careful. I make sure he's in a very secure spot because he's like technically, no offense, it's like having a big baby. Big baby? You a big baby? I'm just playing, baby. Um, but he can't call 911. He can't get up if there was a fire or something started. He can't move, so I can't leave him. So when we first got home to that first apartment, that was a very dark time. I really began to battle for the first time with mega depression and my mental health. It was very difficult to try and then I would get I got several clients, and then I was so depressed I couldn't work. It was a really dark time, and we couldn't go to church, and the church doesn't really come to you. I had a couple come a couple of times from a church I had reached out to, um, but that was really cool visits, but it was just 2 visits, and then that was it. And I couldn't get there. I didn't have a vehicle that I could take him in and things like that. And so it was just a very dark time. But what I let it do is drive me back to the word, and again, I've said this in most of these videos, I think, I looked back at the word and the things David would say, like, I think I'm dying here, God. Do you even care? Do you even hear me? And I began to realize that I could pour it all out before God. God would listen. He didn't condemn me. He didn't say, shut up, come back when you get yourself together, all these different things like that. And that he was still there. And so as I had redefined my faith and my life began to take a different shape. It was a very painful time, a very deeply dark time. And I just have to say, it was very difficult, but I wouldn't trade for it because look who he is now. He's such a different person now. Still nonverbal, but we can communicate. I'll talk about that maybe in some video. I'm going to do some videos tomorrow about what he's doing now, how much progress he's making, some of the therapies we've tried to do and things like that. I'll probably make those videos tomorrow. But bringing him home was the best decision I ever made, but it put me in the most difficult position emotionally, physically, financially, all these different things. It was like every area of my life was just broken. And I felt like life was just crushing me and sucking the life out of me. And I did learn. I reached out to Johnny Erickson, who has a ministry for caregivers, and got some materials from them. And I learned from them about the social isolation that you go through as a caregiver. You don't have a social life. You can't just jump and run, and even though I can go places now, there's so many factors. If the weather's not just perfect, if it's raining, if it's snowing, if it's too cold, if it's too hot, if the air's working in the van or it's not working, all these different things. Is like he's coughing now, so we're kind of limiting what we're doing right now. When then you've got flu season, you don't want to go somewhere inside in flu season, but during flu season it's too cold, so you can't go outside. All these different factors, and it just weighed so heavily on me. But I began to learn that I could express myself through poetry, through writing, through music. Hopefully, I'll sing y'all a song. If y'all will keep watching after I sing a song. But I began to just pour my heart out and just tell God how broken I was. And in the middle of that brokenness, and in the middle of the struggle, and in the middle of the darkness and the mental health issues, the struggle I was having with depression and no joy and all of these things, God was working. I couldn't always see it. I can look back now, hindsight's 2020. I can look back now and go, God was working in it. One of the first prayers I prayed when I first brought him home and I realized we were living in a cave. That's why I went to Psalm 31, because that's the psalm that David wrote in the cave. He was hiding from Saul in the cave. And the subtitle to 31 days in Psalm 31 is, what's it like to spend 31 days with God in a cave? Because you're not in that cave by yourself. God is there with you. When I began to realize he was with me, I knew I was going to be okay. But that don't mean that in between wasn't hard, right? And so, but one of the first prayers when I brought him home and realized how isolated we were, how different our lives were, and how blind I was to what the future could possibly look like. I couldn't make plans. I couldn't think about the future because I couldn't even handle the day, right? And, but I remember praying, God, don't let me get bitter in this. Help me be productive in this. Help me. I thought of people like, I don't know, right off the top of my head, Watchman Nee's the only one that comes to mind, but there's better examples than that. But how they would go to get in prison, and then that's where they would write. They would begin to write, and they would write books, and they would write prayers, and they would write songs, and all of these things. And it was when they were in those deep, dark times. As a matter of fact, Paul wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, and almost all of those were written from a prison cell, the darkest time of his life. Look at 2 Corinthians 12. Grace is sufficient for you. That's what God told Paul. He didn't say, let me just take this away from you so you make it easy on you. He said, my grace is enough for whatever you're facing today. And I began to rely more and more on God. And why? Because I was weaker and weaker and weaker. I knew my strength was gone. I knew my wisdom was gone. I had to have what? Thundering. I had to have what God had to offer, the strength he offered, the grace he had. And I found out that his mercies were new every morning. And there's no morning to God. He doesn't have morning. It's always day to God. His mercies are new every morning for us, for that day, no matter what that day brings. His grace is enough no matter what we face every single day. His grace is enough. We're going to be okay because he's going through it with us. He didn't abandon us. He didn't say, I don't do brain injuries. I don't do bad wrecks. I don't do trauma. I don't know what you're going to do. You need to cough is what you need to do. Can you cough, please? I know you need to cough. Cough that all out. We'll go get you some breathing treatments in a minute. We live on breathing treatments this time of year. Anyway, so I remember praying that I wouldn't be bitter and that I would be productive in the cave. And to date, I believe I've published 14 books on Amazon, devotionals, Bible studies. Some of them are small. I wrote a story about one time when God healed me back in 86, 87, I guess it was 87, the year Orange Juice saved my life. So I'm working on 2 or 3 books right now. So I have to say God really answered that prayer, that he brought the things out of me that he put in me. He didn't give up on the gift. He didn't give up on the vision. That's probably what we're going to talk about next. I'll probably share that again, that testimony about how God he did every promise he ever promised me before the wreck, because I thought when my son had the wreck, his promises, I knew he didn't lie, but I sure didn't see how he was going to do it. But you know what? He fulfilled every single one. So here we are now. We've got you home. We're in a cave. Are we always going to live in a cave? You'll have to watch the next couple of videos to find out. Did we stay in the cave? No, we didn't. I'll see you next for number 7.